So thank you for coming. I'm Jonathan Lindhorst. I'm a doctoral candidate in jazz performance at the Schulich School of Music in Montreal, McGill University, under the supervision of Professors John Hollenbeck and Robert Hasegawa. I'm also a saxophonist, composer, educator, and researcher with creative and professional bases in both Montreal and Berlin, Germany. And today I'm going to introduce you to tone clock theory, a recently developed harmonic system that maps out 12 previously uncategorized chromatic tonalities, which were later expanded to encompass all of chromaticism and discuss some of the ways that I've been applying this to my compositional practice. This is a subject which I've been deeply engaged with since first discovering it in 2020 during the early days of the pandemic. And it has completely reframed my practice as an improvising musician and composer. I've also been leading public workshops at the Schulich School of Music on this topic, where I've been teaching these techniques to undergraduate and graduate students. And at present, tone clock theory is a very obscure and very under-researched topic. So in addition to talking about my applications of it, I'm gonna try to give a brief overview of how it works. And in terms of the audio, I don't know if he's fixed it yet or not, but we'll see. So within the world of contemporary new music, there have been only two composers that have primarily worked with it, namely the founders, queer Dutch composer Peter Schat, who codified the theory with his, in 1982 and published a book called The Tone Clock in 1984, and New Zealand composer Jenny McLeod, who vastly expanded the theory in 1994 through her unpublished book, Tone Clock Theory Expanded, Chromatic Maps 1 and 2. Peter Schat was quoted as saying the tone clock cannot be judged until it is heard. So with that in mind, I'd like to play you an excerpt from Jenny McLeod's Tone Clock Piece 1. So hopefully this is coming through. So the excerpt you just heard is from the first of a series of 24 tone clock pieces for piano, which she composed between 1998 and 2004. And that is written in hour 9, which is one of the chromatic tonalities I'm going to be discussing. So what exactly is tone clock theory? McLeod described it best in her introduction to Schat's book as a, quote, 12-note harmonic system and also a chromatic map, a tool for providing a systematic and comprehensive view of the whole chromatic territory, unquote, that is a particularly useful tool for a set-based approach towards composition improvisation. This map is organized around 12 intervallic-based chromatic tonalities, which in McLeod's expansion serve as a framework for engaging with all 223 possible pitch class sets. She identified previously undiscovered relationships and networks between them and developed a whole myriad of compositional techniques through this. That would be great. So this is the fully mapped out tone clock that Schat designed as a graphical reference for the chromatic tonalities. It's referred to as the zodiac of the hours. Each of these chromatic tonalities are derived from one of 12 trichordal intervallic set classes, referred to as chromatic triads, which are organized around a clock module from solus interval class to largest, labeled as hours, and given a Roman numeral designation. And each of these hour triads are expanded using a compound transpositional technique Schat developed called steering, which he used to generate a non-repeating 12-tone harmonic field that is based on the intervallic consistency of that hour, giving each a unique yet recognizable harmonic character. And the graphic representations are generated by drawing out the 4 sets along a clock module. Everyone get that? I'm going to break it down really quick. So basically, you can reduce, this is a dense subject, I know, and we're at a jazz conference, and I'm pretty deep in post-tonal theory world right now, but basically there's 4 principles. you have your chromatic triads, which are normally known as trichords, but I find it's just easier to think of these as triads, and that's how Schat and McLeod thought of it. You have this concept of hours, this concept of steering, and the resulting harmonic fields. And I'm going to stress that these are not tone rows. I don't know how familiar you are with Schoenberg and 12-tone rows and how those operate. These are not them. They are not tone rows. They do not function like tone rows, right? So none of those rules apply to this. So in brief, a chromatic triad, each of which represents one of 12 hours, can be steered to create a harmonic field, right? So that's the process. So this is an example of a chromatic triad. So here we have a minor triad and a major triad, right? C minor, C major, which in tone clock world is hour 11. At the bottom you have the intervals, right? The intervallic space between each pitch measured in semitones, right? So a C minor triad would be 3 plus 4, and a C major triad would be 4 plus 3. And because this is an asymmetrical, we have symmetrical and asymmetrical triads, right? Like a diminished triad is symmetrical, major and minor asymmetrical. You reverse the integers, you get minor and major. And what we have here, the labeling system, is we have the Roman numeral that gives us the hour, and then a small m for minor, big N for major. It's pretty straightforward, I think. And the example on the bottom is another chromatic triad. That is hour 2, which has an interval class of 1 plus 2, right? So we've got C, D flat, E flat, and then the major C, D, E flat. So these are all 12 of them. And yeah, there's more, you know, we can have major and minor versions of them, but this is what we call their intervallic prime forms. This is like the most compact version of these. And they each have a relationship to a tonality or a tonal sound that we're familiar with. So, right, 1 plus 1, we all know that sound, chromatic scale. Right, hour 2. Hour 3. Hour 4 has this like major sound, that's just the shell voicing for major 7. Hour 5, very crunchy. And hours 6 through 9, these are sounds that as jazz musicians we're very familiar with. So, right? Whole tone. You get like a dominant minor 7 sound, right? You also get the partial tone pentatonic. Lydian dominant. Hour 9, that's the piece that the Jenny McLeod thing was in. Suspended chordal. And then the last 4, you know them, right? Or the last 3 rather. 10 is diminished, 11 is major minor, 12 is an augmented triad. And they work very systematically, right? They're increasing in intervallic space with each one. So these are the basis for all of tone clock theory. This is the building blocks. It's 12 triads. Now steering. This is awesome. And also, we do this in jazz. I won't go down this rabbit hole, but Coltrane was working with this stuff before anybody, actually. The first tone clock piece is actually off Stellar Regions. It's called the tune Iris. But basically, the white notes, these are called steering notes, right? So these are like the roots of our triad. And what we're doing is we're transposing, we're nesting a shape. Now to get the full 12 notes, we gotta have triads, we gotta have 4 steps to get 12, but you can steer anything by anything. You can generate any kind of shape you want, and there's another system for shapes that don't, you know, use the Roman numerals as well. I'll get into that a bit later. But this is the full hour 2 chromatic tonality. So we have these root notes, right, which is actually an hour 8 tetrad, and for each of these notes, right? And I love the notational system for this, right? We have the first thing, the object we're steering, in this case, hour 2, steered by, that's the slash. Hour 8, minor, because it's 2 plus 4 plus 2. The 4 means tetrad, 4, but you could put 5, you could put 6, you could put 7. It follows a pattern. And that gives us our starting point, the bracketed pitch, right? And then because this is set-based music, we label each set A, B, C, D. And this is all of them. There's 176 possible, with all the transpositions, and some hours have multiple steering options. Some only have 1, some have 4. It really depends, right? But that's all the scales from C. These are all the ones you can have, and they all sound very different. And an important point in its application is you're thinking of these sets. So you don't just play them up and down like you would a normal scale. You know, if I take, like, for example, let's say, you know, hour 5, let's see. Right, but that's its own shape, so I gotta keep them. You can order them however you like. Right, but they're like units. Set-based things. Is that clear so far? I know it's a lot of information. I'm gonna get into the creative stuff now. So, as jazz musicians, whenever we learn a new thing, what's the first thing we're always told to do? It's like put it on a blues, right? So this is what I did. So this is my earliest, not my earliest, but one of my earliest attempts to write a tone clock piece. It's a very simple tune. And it's written hour 3, and that in the top there, that's the full row, that's the full harmonic field. Hour 3 steered by hour 7 minor, and hour 7 has this 2 plus 3 plus 2, this pentatonic kind of sound to it. So let's see if the sound is going, but let's give it a quick listen. Very simple, right? And actually the Jenny McLeod piece is kind of like this too. She just uses that entire piece is just one transposition of the hour 9 field, and she's just using the 4 sets the whole time. So that's what I've done here, and I'm not mixing them, I'm not combining them. And the great thing about this particular hour, so this is the one that has like kind of the hexatonic augmented sound. It's got, first of all, in the roots, you know, well, if we got like, that's like a blues, this is the blues in E basically. So we've got the 1, 2, 4, and the 5. So it's all built in there. And this particular, like every tonality has its own tonal implications. This one, you can get like a altered 7 kind of sound, or a minor major sort of sound, or major 7 sharp 5, right? And if you connect sets A and C, or B and D, you get the augmented scale. So that's all built in there, and every one of these has stuff like that that's completely different. So the next thing I tried to do was like apply this to a standard. So I did an arrangement of After You've Gone. And I'm a big believer that when you do a tune, when you approach it, you should try to be as close, like, as true to the source material and the spirit of the song as much as possible. And I'm a big fan of verses and soli sections and things that, like, lost material. I always like going to the very earliest thing. So I checked out I'm thinking the original version. But anyway, I checked that out. And I reharmonized the verse using hour 2 chromatic triads. And I tried to like find ones that complemented the melody tonally as best as possible. the solos, I wrote a soli section to get back into the melody over most of the form. And for this one, I used all 12 transpositions of the hour 2 fields. And my only considerations was I limited myself to 3 or 4, pitches within each set. So a repeated note if I wanted, sometimes 2. And I tried to take harmonic considerations, tonal considerations, into, as much as possible. So I'm trying to resolve to chord tones and basically write a line that sounds like it's on the changes. I adapted that for a large ensemble I directed at McGill last year. The kids had fun with that line. Big unison. So I want to talk about a couple more of my recent things. So I'm not typically like a jazz guy. I'm more in the free improv, experimental new music world. I love jazz and I do it, but I also do this other stuff. So I wrote a song called Stravinsky and Weather, and I based it in hour 4. And I want to use this is one of the more advanced techniques. This is called deeper level steering. So you can steer things by things. They can happen at multiple levels at the same time. So this hour 4 has 4 possible steering variations. I want to use all 4 of them. So using these steering notes, and I mislabeled that, should be 1 + 4 + 1. That's an hour 4 tetrad. Basically, I took created supersets with they all have 4 individual subsets, but this is each a different steering variation, but then transposed along that larger group, right? So you can do this at as many levels as you want. And that's like how tone clock symphonies and stuff work. Like Peter Schat would write operas and symphonies and so on. So basically, I wrote a 2-part contrapuntal piece that leads into free improvisation, and I always try to improvise in hour 4 when we play this. And I ordered the supersets A, B, C, D in the top, and the retrograde D, C, B, A in the bottom. Now I know we're running low on time. I do want to talk about one last composition. So I wrote a piece called Mouth Propaganda. And for this one, there's 2 variations of the hour 2 field, which has, hour 6, which has like this whole tone kind of sound, right? So I'll just play it really quickly. So this is one variation. Right? Now, there's 2 sets in common within these 2 variations, and that's sets A and C that are separated by that whole tone scale right in the middle. So when I combine these, now this is advanced tone clock stuff here. So I'm steering this, I get this larger field steered by 1, 2, 3, 2, 1. So I mentioned earlier, when something cannot be just described with a Roman numeral, like it's not like an hour pattern, the solution to that is you just write out the intervals that you want. So that's why you can get anything out of this. So this piece, basically there's 3 components. There is a background, a repeated chordal section that is happening the whole time. There are 13 events, and then there's an outro, there's an out melody. And essentially the idea is that it's like a heated argument between two people, and occasionally they agree on something, then they immediately go back to fighting about something else. And the idea is that the saxophone and the drums over top of this chord progression are just like, they start out quiet and the band is just supposed to build and build and build until it breaks, and then you release into this out melody. So I'm gonna play a couple excerpts. So this is the beginning section. You can hear the chordal thing, and this is interesting. These two, the two I played, they end up sounding kind of like a pseudo-tonic and dominant, right? So in post-tonal music, we call these points of centricity. And I'm labeling them like axis 1, axis 2. And I use that material to generate the events that happen on cue. So this is the progression. So that just repeats and builds. And you heard the first two events in there. And then as it gets more intense, we're going to jump ahead a few minutes and we'll get the, so you'll hear events 9, 10, and 11. It's on the other page, but. And then finally, at a certain point, we go to this material. So this is written in hour 5. So I'm modulating to a different tonality, right? This is the steering hour. So these hour 10 is steered by hour 5 or 10. Sorry, hour 6 is steered by hours 5 and 10. These are the two options. 5 is 1 + 1. That's the very atonal, crunchy one. So I modulate to a different chromatic tonality for the outhead. To generate these two fields, I have another slide about it in the next thing, but basically, and this is just to show you can get away from these 3-note shapes. Here I've got a 4-note one, and I've just steered it by just the interval, a major second, and 4, which is a major third. And these are the two intervals that exist in that hour, right? So we'll just play this. That's the end of the fight. You just fall asleep. So, you know. Anyway, thank you very much.